Someone once said that diplomacy is the art of telling someone to go to hell in such a way that they look forward to the journey. As a woman, you should try your best in social situations to maintain your dignified comportment and be a diplomat. This diplomacy is simply a matter of you establishing the rules of the road regarding behavior with every person that you meet. You should be fair, you should be unambiguous, just as every diplomat is constantly aware of boundaries, so should the people who interact with you.
Have you ever been the person to say it how it is? I know I have, and definitely to my detriment. And I have the life experience to see how that did not serve me, but it's so reassuring to read it in this Old Money, New Woman book and see there were reasons of why I should have and have now changed my ways in that regard. Now, I think the thing that I didn't necessarily put into words, but I can now put into words after reading this book is we need to establish boundaries in various areas of our life. And considering these areas in advance will help you be more polite and more diplomatic when certain conversations and topics and situations arise. And especially if these situations or these topics are delicate. Now, my husband, bless his heart, he is somebody who he needs to practice what he's going to say in important situations all of the time. And I've always laughed at him a little bit because I'm like, oh, this isn't difficult. We can just easily speak these things out. But when I sit back and I think about it, think about people of importance. Think about people in politics, people that have to go give speeches. They will often practice their speech, or they will often do a run through of a Q&A with people on their team to ensure that they're prepared for any questions that might be thrown their way or any comments that they need to make. And so why wouldn't I prepare like that? Do you remember a few videos back where we talked about being prepared like an old money woman? Well, these are some of the things that an old money woman would be thinking about. These are some of the values that she will hold, and you don't want to be saying anything controversial. So you do want to be thinking about the way that you speak things. Now, there was a moment a few years ago where I was asked a question, and it was a little bit of an uncomfortable question, and the person called me out and she said, "Wow, you're so diplomatic." And I laughed at the time because I felt like she understood why I was struggling to give her an answer. However, what I didn't prepare for was someone calling me out on my diplomaticness, if that's even a word. And I think that if I had prepared a little bit more, I could have handled that question in a way that my diplomatic answer would have been believable. Now, you might be thinking, why do I care so much to lie, essentially? Because I think sometimes we can look at diplomatic answers as skirting around the truth, and nobody likes a politician's answer because it's like they give an answer that's not an answer and you're still left with questions after they answer it. But I also feel like in the circumstances of, say, a politician, they are somebody that is supposed to be serving us with proper answers. Whereas I look at the situation where this person called me out for being diplomatic, truth is, she didn't need to be privy to what was actually going on in this circumstance. So I could have done with having her believe my answer instead of it being diplomatic, but almost sarcastically diplomatic to the effect that she knew the words that I was saying didn't match what was going on in here. And I think this is such a skill to have because there are going to be many times where you will be confronted with a question that it will not serve you. You will not change any opinions if the person gets the answer that they may want. Maybe it's a little bit of a dramatic situation, maybe it's a gossipy situation, etc. So here are a few categories to start thinking about so you can be prepared to be your most polite and your most diplomatic self. Something like how a old money woman would be. So you're going to want to think about your business relationships. Will you do something unethical in your workplace? Will you start a workplace romance? What about your romantic relationships? Will you stay faithful Will you sleep with someone right away? What about society? What standards do you have for your behavior? Will you be going to dive bars? Will you be dancing on tabletops? Will you be associating with people that have a interesting and colorful past? Maybe they're a part of certain groups. Will you find yourself in certain situations that might not best serve you? Obviously, this one varies, and sometimes we don't know whether to ask certain questions before we get ourselves into certain situations. I personally went to Benidorm a few years back, and it was for a hen do, and I didn't ask certain questions before I went on this hen do, which, by the way, if you're in North America, a hen do is a stagette. And I think if any of you are in the UK and you have heard Benidorm and hen do's or stag do's, you have heard the name Sticky Vicky. And I wasn't privy to the knowledge of Sticky Vicky beforehand. And it was definitely, to my surprise, the event that I got dragged along to. And I think that sometimes we have to ask questions, even though it might not be a circumstance or with people that we think we have to ask certain questions for. But I think if I had asked certain questions, I would have been able to politely decline and not put myself into a certain situation that I feel like doesn't champion the person that I want to be. Equally, I think it would have allowed me to position myself in a way that I could have declined and given an explanation without feeling any type of peer pressure. Remember in a few videos back where we talked about how old money women aren't swayed by the influence of the people that are around them? I think that often we think of peer pressure in regards to someone making you smoke or making you drink too much. But I think sometimes we can have pressure from those that are closest to us because we're not wanting to disappoint them. And in this particular situation, I wasn't wanting to disappoint the person that I live with. And so I said yes to a situation without asking the necessary questions before I went on this trip. And if I had done that, I wouldn't have found myself in the situation that I found myself in. So here is what I have learned from this Old Money, New Woman book in regards to how old money women do it. So they are friendly and they're personable and they're still very kind, but they often start their relationships off with a certain formality and a certain reserve. And they require others to earn their trust. It's not just given. They have learned to be themselves and, most importantly, their best selves. And I think ultimately because they have that self-acceptance, they understand that some people are going to accept you and like you and some won't, and therefore they move on. Have you learned anything about how old money women navigate delicate situations? I would love to know your biggest takeaways or your tips on how you've researched and learned that they do it in the comment section down below. If you like this video, I'd be so honored if you press the like button so then I can gauge, because I know some of you aren't comfortable with commenting. I actually have had a few comments from you over on Instagram in my DMs saying that you didn't feel comfortable enough to comment on the video, but you felt comfortable enough to send me a DM and so we can have a conversation. So if that is something that suits you more, my DMs are always open. Sometimes it takes me a minute to get back to you. However, if you felt comfortable with commenting, I'd be so honored if you join the conversation down below. Equally, if you press subscribe and join this little community. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.